Today's, today's update, we're going to talk about It's Coming. And I think you'll understand what I'm talking about that. I'm going to catch up on a few things from last week, and then I'll get into the events of this week as we talk about these different things, when all these different signs that, or things going on in our world and culture that seem to indicate that things really aren't getting better. I read an article this week where somebody said, you know, really things are a lot better than they used to be because we have technology and yeah, you know, we do have better cars and we have better technology, and you know, I have a brand new set of irons that are great, and all I could say all is well with the world. But this week was really the last couple of weeks have been a couple of the most difficult updates that I've had to prepare, just because of what I've seen going on. So I'm going to catch up on something last week that I think was significant that I didn't have time to get into, and that was the funeral of Muhammad Ali. Now I know you think, what does this have to do with anything? He was a Muslim, but I don't know if any of you watched his funeral or parts of it, but the things that were said at his funeral were absolutely, they were stunning. I mean, I felt like I'd been hit by an Ali punch after I watched them. I was kind of staggering, like, I can't believe that I actually saw that. There was a lot of praise of Ali from all different quarters. He was a great boxer and fighter, but, you know, I don't think he was a great human being. 4 marriages, some illegitimate children. Now everybody's going to be fighting over his estate. He left a legacy that is somewhat questionable. He was a great athlete, but there's no doubt about that. One of the interesting things, and I'll just play this part, of course, it was a parade of everybody from Jesse Jackson and other people that you could expect coming to the funeral to get their photo op in. One guy who was given a speaking slot, and I'm not sure why this is, you know, there is a very strong anti-Jewish strain in the Nation of Islam sect to which Muhammad Ali belonged. It's very black-oriented, black supremacist, that sort of thing. And the man who now leads that, Louis Farrakhan, has been very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish in a lot of the comments that he's made. But one of the speakers at the funeral was this guy named Michael Lerner, who is the editor of Tikkun magazine. And you might remember Michael Lerner. He's a very left-wing Jewish rabbi who was involved a lot with the Clintons back during the Clinton administration, and he's still around. Very liberal. In fact, if you notice, the thing on his lapel there is this little pin that he has, which is a pin with the Jewish and Palestinian flags on it. And I looked on the internet. You can actually go buy this thing if you want. And Breitbart reported this. The headline was, Rabbi turns Ali service into political pep rally, denounces racist police, says 1% must share this wealth. So listen to just a clip or two of what Lerner had to say. I may not play the whole thing just in the interest of time, since we have some things scheduled right after this today. So here's Michael Lerner at Ali's funeral.
Master of compassion, God of compassion, send your blessings to Muhammad Ali, and send your blessings to all who mourn for him. I come here speaking as representative of American Jews, and to say that American Jews have played an important role of solidarity with the African American struggles in this country, and that we today stand in solidarity with the Islamic community in this country and all around the world.
Now, while he's speaking, I thought that we might just take a look at some of the things going on in the Islamic community in Tel Aviv, which is what is playing in the clip there. This, of course, is the shooting that took place in Tel Aviv.
We will not tolerate politicians or anyone else putting down Muslims and blaming Muslims for a few people.
We've got about 4 standing O's for this talk. You might remember him.
We know what it's like to be demeaned. We know what it's like to have a few people who act against the highest visions of our tradition to then be identified as the value of the entire tradition. And one of the reasons that we in Tikkun magazine, a magazine of liberal and progressive Jews, but also an interfaith magazine, have called upon the United States to stand up to the part of the Israeli government that is oppressing Palestinians is that we as Jews understand that our commitment is to recognize that God has created everyone in God's image and that everyone is equally precious. And that means the Palestinian people as well as all other people on the planet.
Okay. He continued. This is a funeral, by the way.
How do we honor Muhammad Ali? And the answer is the way to honor Muhammad Ali, tell the 1% who own 80% of the wealth of this country that it's time to share that wealth. Tell the politicians who use violence worldwide and then preach into nonviolence to the oppressed, to close our bases around the world, to bring the troops home. Tell those who created mass incarceration that it's time to create a guaranteed income for everyone in our society. Tell judges to let out of prison the many African Americans swept up by racist police and imprisoned by racist judges. Many of them in prison today for offenses like possessing marijuana that white people get away with all the time. Tell the leaders of Turkey to stop killing the Kurds. Tell Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that the way to get security is for Israel is to stop the occupation of the West Bank and help create a Palestinian state. Tell the next president of the United States that tell her that the way to achieve homeland security is not for us to try new ways of domination. The strategy of domination of the world, of the other, to get security has been tried for the last 10,000 years and it doesn't work. The way to get security is for the United States to become known as the most generous and caring country in the world, not the most powerful. So I want to, as chair of the Interfaith Network of Spiritual Progressives, by the way, spiritualprogressives.org, come and join us, spiritualprogressives.org. I want to affirm our commitment to the well-being of all Muslims on this planet, as well as the people of all faiths and secular humanists as well. We wish to pay honor to Muslims of the world as they continue today the fast of Ramadan, and join with them in mourning the loss and celebrating the life of Muhammad Ali, a great fighter for...
Okay. One of the strangest funerals I've ever seen, as they buried a member of the 1%. I don't know if they took any of his money, if he got a contribution for whatever that spiritual progressives thing he was asking for. But I think this plays into some of the things that I want to talk about today. First, let's set this up with some scripture verses. Matthew chapter 24. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many will wax cold. In a parallel passage in Luke chapter 21, then he said unto them, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines and pestilences and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. But before all these, they shall lay hands on you and persecute you, deliver you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts, not to meditate before what ye shall answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And ye shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends, and some of you they shall cause to be put to death, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. That's coming. And I think we saw more steps being taken, large steps being taken towards that with the events of the past week. It's interesting these all are occurring during Ramadan. The funeral of Ali, a Muslim, occurred during Ramadan, and you heard what this man said, and it was a parade of people talking about things like that. So I want to just take a quick look at some things in the Middle East, then we'll look at Orlando, okay? Just some headlines recently. This just came out the other day. The Palestinian Prime Minister says Israel has no right to counter terrorism because they're illegally there. They shouldn't be there. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a conference in New York City put on by the Jerusalem Post. I'm going to play you a couple clips from that. It was on the panel on terrorism. The first is Malcolm Heinlein is his name. I don't know how you say it. Hoenlein, who's going to talk a little bit about terrorism, followed by Caroline Glick. Just listen to this.
First, we got to demonstrate strength because terrorists, by their nature, are cowards. They attack civilians, they attack buses, they attack women. They are cowards, and the thing they respect is strength. When they're confronted with strength, they back off. And part of the problem is that we have tolerated for too long, and as I think both would agree, we waited too long to respond. The international community, I'm talking about the United States, Europe, and others, we gave them a license to kill. We can go after the funding sources. None of them can exist without the oxygen. We can go after those who aid and abet them, and largely this is Iran. If we deal with Iran, then we can deal with Hamas and Hezbollah and everything else. But if we don't deal with Iran, we allow them to get away with what they're getting away with, then we will continue to face the problem in increasing ways. We know ISIS moves into Syria now, trying to create Al-Qaeda to create its own little caliphate. We see ISIS in Lebanon. We see all of these things. We knew about the foreign fighters when there were hundreds, when there were thousands, and now there are tens of thousands, and we did not act. We could have stopped these things. Now, we can't deal with it. European countries can't deal with it. I meet with their security chiefs. They tell us it takes 10 policemen to monitor each one. And France doesn't have 15,000 people to assign. Britain, France, half of their armies are being used for domestic security. So we are facing a worldwide plague, and only a concerted message. And when they believe the West does not have the will and determination, that's what Osama bin Laden said, Hania said it, all of them said it, the West lacks will and determination. And we do not show them. We have to win back our allies from Saudi Arabia to Morocco to Azerbaijan. They will be allies in this fight. They feel alienated from us now. We have to show them that we will lead a war against terrorism, and we can defeat it.
You've written a lot about this issue that I think both Malcolm and Gabi are talking about where there's a lack of will. And you look around the world today and you see terror is unfortunately thriving in certain places. Europe, particularly. How do you understand that?
Well, I think that, with all due respect to Ephraim Halevi, this is an existential threat, and the people who are threatening us the most are ourselves, because we can fight and we can defeat them, but we have made ourselves paralyzed. We've paralyzed ourselves by refusing to recognize the nature of the threat. Even when we talk about a war on terrorism, terrorism is a tactic. It's not a strategy. I mean, they're using it as a tool. It's not what defines them. What defines them is their view of Islam, as Hassan said, and we have to be willing to acknowledge that we're not. You know, we're not, you see in Europe, they refuse to acknowledge the truth, and they're killing themselves. I mean, their capital cities are becoming no-go zones for any woman, for any girl. You know, you cannot survive this way, and they're not. Sweden is collapsing before our eyes. So we wouldn't say, you know, there's no solution to this. First of all, let's diagnose the problem. It's extraordinary to me that 15 years after 9/11, the West is steeped in denial about something, even when hundreds of people are being massacred in their streets and in their theaters and in their cafes. This is a disaster. In Israel ourselves, we have a problem with our own denial mechanisms because we also want to believe that it's about us, because then we can blame ourselves and we can get angry at one another and talk about this one being an enlightened person and this one being a dark person. And we're not looking at the people who are saying, who are training their children, who are indoctrinating them and are giving them the weaponry to murder ours. And, you know, if we are not willing to do this, we want to say it's about peace. I mean, really, you want to talk to Hamas? Are you kidding me? I mean, these people are not interested in talking to us. They're interested in annihilating us. So, you know, to recap, can we win this war? Which war? Are we willing to describe it in terms that are real? Are we willing to acknowledge what it's about? That it's not about us. It's about them, and we have to be willing to acknowledge them on their own terms and deal with them as such, whether it's Iran behind them, Saudi Arabia, whether it's just people going to the mosque 5 times a day and believing what they believe. We have to simply allow people to speak for themselves instead of constantly reinterpreting what they say in order for us not to have to do anything about it. So I think, you know, that the answer here is clear. You know, you have to be willing to do something. And one final statement about what Netanyahu apparently said in this interview. You know, I have to say something. We have a very limited time frame for attacking our enemies, because the West is really, in many ways, collaborating with them and saying that every step that Israel takes in its own defense is somehow or another, if we are successfully defending ourselves, then we must be committing a war crime because we're not allowed to be successful. So, you know, the thing is that if we have to move quickly, then we have to be willing to act premeditative. We have to be the preemptors. We have to be determining when we fight and not constantly reacting to barrages of missiles on our cities. That means that if we know that there are missiles in this town in Lebanon, if we know that they're headquartered in Shifa Hospital, then we have to go quickly, deal with it, and get out. Because the Prime Minister is right. There are so many things we can't do, so we need that shock and awe at the very outset, I think, from a tactical perspective. So
Okay. How about Caroline Glick for president, right? I don't know if she gave up her American citizenship, but I'm pretty sure she was born here. She's from Chicago. So she lived in the same neighborhood. She grew up in the same neighborhood that another current politician lived in. She grew up in that neighborhood. So I just would wonder how that went on the street when she was a kid. It'd be interesting to watch. This thing in Israel, the political situation continues to spin a little bit out of control. Now there's a group of former IDF heads are calling for Netanyahu to resign. Ehud Barak, who was prime minister for a time, he is calling for Netanyahu to resign, saying it's time for him to go. I don't know that elections will happen that soon. Netanyahu seems to have shored up his coalition a little bit, but it's by a razor-thin margin. So we'll just have to kind of watch that. He's not very popular in Israel right now, because, of course, he's being blamed for. They never blame the people who are actually causing the problem. They don't blame the people who come in and shoot up a restaurant in Tel Aviv, a coffee shop in Tel Aviv. It's Netanyahu's fault because he's trying to, doesn't give them what they want. It sounds very much the left in Israel, if I could be so bold as to say, is as stupid as the left in America when it comes to analyzing things. And you're going to see that in large letters here in just a moment. And then this was in the Jerusalem Post this morning. Hamas and Fatah are meeting to discuss reconciliation in Cairo. I think that's a potentially significant event. And then the UN is now saying that Israel should cooperate with our human rights investigations. Of course, you know how that's going to end with charges against Israeli soldiers. And this was a good article in the Jerusalem Post last week about the daily Palestinian terrorism you don't hear about. There are dozens, dozens of incidents every day along the West Bank and in Israel, the area called the West Bank, of rock throwing at cars, at people, injuries, and that type of thing. You only hear about the ones where somebody usually gets killed or actually stabbed, but it's a huge problem, and it continues. I don't have time to go into this. The White House is a very unusual thing that a bunch of former ambassadors have gotten together and wrote a memo that criticizes the way Obama is handling Syria. And I think it's hard to figure out how Obama is handling Syria is one of the things that's difficult to determine. I still say sometimes I look at what he does or doesn't do, and it's like he calls up Vladimir Putin and asks him beforehand, what can I not do to help you out? And I'm just saying that's what my observation, and I think the facts bear that out in many instances. Well, the big news this week was the attack in Orlando, 49 people killed, not including the terrorist, of course. A gay nightclub was attacked. The man roamed for about 3 hours throughout the nightclub before he was finally taken out by a SWAT team that had come and broke in. There was mass chaos going on, but he was texting. It was this is the social media terrorist, the terrorist that knows how to use social media. He's texting. He's posting to Facebook. He's calling 911. He's texting his wife, who I saw some news report that she's missing now. I don't know if she is or not, but she apparently knew quite a bit about what he was going to do. So the headlines were there about all of this, this attack that occurred. And it immediately turned away from what the root cause was, which was Islamic terrorism, to who are we going to blame? And I'm going to play you a couple video clips that lay out who everybody is blaming. And the New York Times, 2 days after, on Tuesday, they had an editorial called "The Threat to Gay Americans." True words, Mr. President. And Frank Brunei, who is a homosexual writer, he's the one who came out and said that we need to change Christianity because of what they do. We just have to maybe pass a law to make Christianity change. That was a year or so ago, before I think the decision of the Supreme Court, which is still not a year old, by the way. I want you to remember that. In this one editorial, the New York Times said this: Donald Trump, I mean, by the time this editorial is written, a lot of the dead had not been identified. There were a lot of families in great distress. So the New York Times, in its exercising its compassion, said this. That's a sarcastic remark. Donald Trump, unlike some other prominent Republicans, called the Orlando massacre what it was, an attack on gay people. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, could not even offer that recognition to a community in pain. Yet Mr. Trump has vowed to choose Supreme Court justices who would overturn marriage equality, and he supports the deceptively named First Amendment Defense Act, an effort to approve discrimination against gay and transgender people nationwide under the guise of religious freedom. And Mr. Trump backtracked from his statement that transgender people should be able to use the bathroom consistent with their gender identity after Ted Cruz used his words to attack him during the nomination fight. That restrooms have become such a fixation. There were people who died in restroom in that club. That restrooms have become such a fixation, particularly at the state level, is a worrying reminder of the entrenched stigma the community continues to face. The loudest advocates of this odious effort have been Governor Pat McCrory of North Carolina and Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, who has worked in lockstep with the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Meanwhile, Governor Phil Bryant of Mississippi in April signed into law a bill that allows discrimination against LGBT, they don't even know, it's LGBTQ, they don't even know, people in schools and the workplace. This is just, and this is what was important to the New York Times in the days after the shooting. And this one page where they had all these different articles about the shooting that occurred, in the lower right-hand corner is an article that says a death toll fails to narrow a chasm on gay rights. And so the New York Times said, well, this is what was really important to them. In the weeks, now I want you know what the Bible says, right? I hope. Romans chapter 1. It says, in the weeks leading up to the killings, they pointed out issues involving gays were boiling over in Congress and in Republican-controlled states around the country. More than 150 pieces of legislation were pending in state legislatures that would restrict rights or legal protections for sexual minorities. Now, this statement, a Republican congressman read his colleagues a Bible verse from Romans that calls for the execution of gays. Now, listen, there is no, Mike Clapham, you went to seminary. Is there a verse in Romans that calls for the execution of gays? It is a bold-faced lie. What I am telling you is what these leftists are going to do is they're going to lie about you and me and the things that we hold dear. It's coming, folks. It's not coming, it's here. And you need to stand up and resist it. Okay, now look, maybe it'll get worse and worse and worse. I kind of expect that. But as my friend Jack Hibbs says, go down swinging, for crying out loud. This is one of the most disgusting interviews I've ever seen. Anderson Cooper of the Florida Attorney General, right the day after the shooting, I believe, on Monday. I'll play a part of it. This is unbelievable.
I want to ask you, I saw you the other day saying that anyone who attacks the LGBT community, our LGBT community, you said, will be gone after with the full extent of the law.
Exactly right.
I talked to a lot of gay and lesbian people here yesterday who are not fans of yours and who said that they thought you were being a hypocrite, that you for years have fought, you've basically gone after gay people, said that in court that gay people, simply by fighting for marriage equality, were trying to do harm to the people of Florida, to induce public harm, I believe was the term you used in court. Do you really think you're a champion of the gay community?
Let me tell you, when I was sworn in as Attorney General, I put my hand on the Bible and was sworn to uphold the Constitution of the state of Florida. That's not a law. That was voted into our state constitution by the voters of Florida. That's what I was defending. Had nothing to do, I've never said I don't like gay people. That's ridiculous.
But do you worry about using language accusing gay people of trying to do harm to the people of Florida when doesn't that send a message to some people who might have bad ideas in mind?
Anderson, I don't believe gay people could do harm to the state of Florida.
But you argued that in court.
My lawyer argued a case defending what the Supreme Court allowed the voters to put in our state constitution.
But you were arguing that gay marriage, if there was gay marriage, if there was same-sex marriage, that would do harm to the people of Florida, since Florida society.
That it was constitutional to put that in the Constitution.
Are you saying you did not believe it would do harm to Florida?
Of course not. Of course not. Gay people. No, I've never said that. Those words have never come out of my mouth.
But that is specifically what you were arguing in court. Had there been no gay marriage, had there been no same-sex marriage, you do realize that spouses, there would be no spouses, that boyfriends and girlfriends of the dead would not be able to get information and would not be able to probably even visit in the hospital here. Well, so isn't there a sick irony in that?
Well, yeah, and let me tell you something. Let me take it a step farther. People aren't right now who are partners and aren't married officially aren't able to get information. So we're trying to assist them in getting information because early on
isn't there a sick irony that you for years were fighting that very idea?
I was defending the Constitution of what's over 69% of the voters put in the Constitution.
But the federal court said that's not the Constitution, and you continued to fight it.
No, that's why we rushed it to get it to the U.S. Supreme Court, because we needed
before
finality.
It was the Supreme Court, there was a federal judge, and you continued to fight it after the federal judge ruled. And in fact, you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money
Well,
fighting
Anderson,
it.
we rushed to get it to the Supreme Court. You know what today's about? Human beings. Today's
Right.
about victims.
It's about gay and
We're
lesbian
here.
victims.
It sure is. LGBT
Right.
victims.
I'm just
It's
wondering,
about-
is it
it's
hypocritical
about Florida.
to portray yourself as a champion of the gay community when I'm just reflecting what
I'm
a lot
not-
of gay people have told me they don't see you as that?
Anderson, I'm not portraying myself as anything other than trying to help human beings who have lost their lives, who are right behind us right now in hospital beds, who have family members who aren't getting the services they need. This morning, you know what I've been doing? Trying to fight with a funeral home for overcharging family members
That's
to
sickening.
bury their
It's just stunning, you know, because you oppose gay marriage, you're as bad as the terrorists. That's what he's saying. And this little snit, this little rich boy snit, Anderson Cooper, you know who his mother was, right? His mother is Gloria Vanderbilt of the Vanderbilt fortune. Poor little rich girl. Yes, that is his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt. Yes. So, and he just came out last year himself. So listen, this is what's coming. This is the verse in Romans. It says, who knowing the judgment of God, that they who commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Listen, we're all guilty before God, and we all stand guilty without Jesus Christ. That's the point. There is nothing in the New Testament that calls for the execution of gays. That is a bold-faced lie, or it was written by a total ignoramus. And I would suggest to you, it's an ignoramus who's lying. I think that's the better analysis. So, another editorial. Monday, Mr. Trump seized on the Orlando horde to summon Americans to panic, repeating his call to seal the borders to Muslims and refugees, to expand the surveillance and security state, to keep the nation awash in guns, to treat all Muslims as terrorists or potential terrorists, or the complicit enablers of terrorism. On Tuesday, Mr. Obama, in response, gave voice to what Americans of goodwill understand. We've gone through moments in our history before when we reacted out of fear and we came to regret it. We have seen our government mistreat our fellow citizens. It's been a shame in our history. So, see what they say? It's Trump that wants to expand the surveillance state. I don't think that's true. Who wants to control your speech? Who wants to delete everything that you might say that might be negative about a particular religion? This from an American Civil Liberties Union lawyer. You know what is gross? Your thoughts and prayers and Islamophobia after you created this anti-queer climate. That was tweeted 10:33 a.m. last Sunday while we were sitting here. The Christian right has introduced 200 anti-LGBT bills in the last 6 months, and people are blaming Islam for this. No. You're supposed to be smart to go to law school. You don't have to be wise. David Brooks said this in an editorial in the New York Times. The fact is that 15 years after 9/11, we still haven't arrived at a true understanding of our enemy. How much is religion involved in jihad? How much is religion involved in jihadism or psychology or politics? Terrorism emerges from a psychic state, not a spiritual one. This is mumbo jumbo. This turns into this is the sort of the nominal conservative guy, one of them that writes for the New York Times. This turns into a grievance, the belief that some external injury is cause of this injury rather than some internal weakness. Sally Crone, who contributes to MSNBC or CNN, said the simple fact is that progressive Muslims recognize my fundamental humanity and equality as a queer person more than Christian right does. Islamic extremists kill LGBT people. Christian and Jewish extremists just drive us to commit suicide either way. Hate is hate. I was going to read this. I don't have time to go into this. A great blog post by Sultan Kanish. Islam's violence is rooted in instability. It talks about the fact that, I'll summarize it, Islam has always been unstable. It's very tribal. It's very local. These tribes have fought. Muhammad was able to unite them for a while. They've been united under some empires loosely, but eventually they fight because it's very unstable. One thing that Islam really doesn't recognize, he makes a great point, I think this is where I read it, that they don't really recognize property rights. And so when they essentially go and they use up all the resources in some place and then they move on. sort of like, I don't think he uses the term, I'll use the term like locusts. They get up, and that's what's happening now. The Middle East, they're moving. They've used up the resources in large part. They're moving on to someplace else. And they're moving to Europe. And this is the progression that we take. Now, what's interesting in the timing of all this is that 3 days before the shooting in Orlando, the Homeland Security Advisory Council, authorized by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, issued a report, Countering Violent Extremism. June 9th, it was published. Just 3 days. Now, I want you to ask you, it had, an all-star panel of people were participating in this from both sides of the political aisle. The first thing they talk about is well, here's recommendation number 3. Change our lexicon by shifting how we speak with each other and the world. It says this, I'm quoting directly from the report. There are several layers to the issue around lexicon in the context of countering violent extremism. On the one hand, it might seem obvious to change the term CVE because there is a perception about its meaning that securitizes relationships between government and, in particular, Muslim communities. What? I know. You have to go to college to learn to write that obtusely. And what they're saying is, it's not fair because just by calling it countering violent extremism, we're implying that Islam might be involved in some way. And that's not fair to the Muslim communities. Now, remember what Brooks, so it's all rooted back in the language. And I think you'll see this unfold today. This results in credible influencers rejecting work that at all connects them to CVE. So good people in the Muslim community, they don't work because we call it countering violent extremism. But they violated their own rules by calling their report countering violent extremism. On the other hand, reformulating a new term that is agreed upon by the interagency and community groups could take years and is unlikely to yield a sustainable consensus. Subcommittee members do not recommend that the department engage in a process to redefine CVE itself, but boy, they sure would like for that to happen. Instead, the subcommittee recommends focusing on immediate steps that can help engage the full range of actors in the private and non-governmental sectors across communities and our nation. You see all this? This is postmodernism run amok. This is communities feeling, there's no truth in this. It's all about what they feel. This is like the people from the emerging church went and worked for the government. This is what we get in our day and age. I think this is fulfillment. This is prophetic in the way that this is unfolding. There's at the same time, report after report has recommended that the U.S. government be consistent in its language and its meaning, highlighting that tone and word choice matter. Under no circumstances should we be using language that will alienate or be disrespectful of fellow Americans. Unless you're Christian, then we can say that you're haters, and that sort of thing. Thus, we need to be clear in what we mean and how we say it. Further, we are at a stage, a world stage with global events driving fear, political and cultural rhetoric, leaning on sharp and divisive language and deep polarization and distrust across communities. Tone and word choice matter, they say. Here's the So this is the way, that was under the Bush administration, so this is what's been going on for time. Let's see, another recommendation instructs the department to ensure terminology is properly calibrated to diminish the recruitment efforts of extremists who argue that the West is at war with Islam. This is a myth that's happened. Here's a recommendation, look at this. I'll skip forward to the 4th point. Reject religiously charged terminology and problematic positioning by using plain meaning American English. Yeah, start with your report. Us for them. For example, use American Muslim rather than Muslim American. Muslim communities rather than Muslim world. Because this will change everything. This will change your religion. Do you understand how smart these people are, how far evolved they are above all of us? That's sarcastic. This is just, it's hard for me to hold it together when I read this stuff. For example, on using American English instead of religious, legal, and cultural terms like jihad, sharia, takfir, and ummah. You can't even describe the words that they use. You can't use them because it might.
Our adversary. Muslims are peaceful and Islam is not our adversary. Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people and have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism. The obsession in some quarters with a clash of civilization or repeating the specific words radical Islamic terrorism isn't just a distraction. It gives these criminals, these murderers, more standing than they deserve. It actually...
That, in a nutshell, that encapsulates the problem. If she is elected, it will not change. It likely will get worse than it is now. The report continues on. The report, it talks about generational threat. I don't really have time to go into this. It talks about we have to put people in their stories and give them stories. This is postmodernism. This is exactly what the emerging church has been saying for years. Our nation's children will grow up in a world we could not have imagined a generation ago. A thriving world where human ingenuity and knowledge continues to expand by leaps and bounds. As that process of human evolution, including expansion of freedom and liberties across the globe, proceeds, our government must remain vigilant, adapt, and evolve to protect them. This was Jay Johnson interviewed on a CBS show the other morning. You can go look up the clip if you want. Essentially what he said is gun control. We need to control guns. I think the blaze went out to a memorial happening in the LGBT community in New York, and they interviewed a couple of people about what was the cause of the problems in Orlando. And I'm going to play for you. I want you to hear their quotes because these are people who've been steeped in what the Department of Homeland Security task force, subcommittee task force, wanted to hear. Listen to these just two people.
A combination of lack of gun control and it just being so much hate for the LGBT community. I would not blame Islam for this. Islam is religion of peace. Even though there is a lot of extremism, there have been no high examples so far in the United States of America that show straight up LGBT hate as far as Islam goes. So I would just try and leave the radical Islamic extremists out of this and just blame no gun control and straight up hate for the LGBT community.
Do with a particular type of culture that is being brought up right now by, for example, the most prominent and visible Donald Trump supporters, the absolute disgust and loathing for anything other than oneself, selfishness, and it is absolutely tied to easy access to guns.
As Director Comey has said, we currently do not have any information to indicate that a foreign terrorist group directed the attack in Orlando. It is increasingly clear, however, that the killer took in extremist information and propaganda over the internet. He appears to have been an angry, disturbed, unstable young man who became radicalized. And let me make a final point. For a while now, the main contribution of some of my friends on the other side of the aisle have made in the fight against ISIL is to criticize this administration and me for not using the phrase radical Islam. That's the key, they tell us. We can't beat ISIL unless we call them radical.
All of that is a lie, okay? A big, fat lie. That's what you would call a petulant president.
Islamists. What exactly would using this label accomplish? What exactly would it change? Would it make ISIL less committed to trying to kill Americans? Would it bring in more allies? Is there a military strategy that is served by this?
Well, Clinton came out, Hillary came out and said that you shouldn't demonize Muslims. By the way, that clip that I played of her earlier was a speech she gave at the Council on Foreign Relations in November of 2015, about 6 months ago. So she hasn't changed her position. She's not going to change her position. And this is Jeffrey Goldberg in the Atlantic writing that, and you'll see that Hillary talked about, we should be talking about the clash of civilizations, and Goldberg says in his article that just came out the other day, Obama believes that the clash is taking place within a single civilization, and that Americans are somewhat collateral damage in this fight between Muslim modernizers and Muslim fundamentalists. One news show, an editorial in the Jerusalem Post the other day said it's global jihad, stupid. I agree with her. Somebody put together a clip of the president saying things about the first religion is Islam.
The United States is not and will never be at war with Islam. And I'm also proud to carry with me the goodwill of the American people and a greeting of peace from Muslim communities in my country. Assalamu alaikum. Islam is not part of the problem in combating violent extremism. It is an important part of promoting peace. Our enemies respect no religious freedom. Al-Qaeda's cause is not Islam. It's a gross distortion of Islam. The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim. Remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. Slavery and Jim Crow all too often was justified in the name of Christ. On Easter, I do reflect on the fact that as a Christian, I am supposed to love. And I have to say that sometimes when I listen to less than loving expressions by Christians, I get concerned.
Well, now, so he gets in there and says, we can't call it this. It's not the way. I don't need to use radical Islam. It's not that much of a problem. It's the JV team. We've got them on the run, et cetera. You know what he's been saying over time. I've been playing clips of him for a while. But, I haven't used one for about 2 months, so I want you to give me some credit for that, okay? But, so he makes that statement in the White House. I think it was the next day, the head of the CIA goes to Congress to testify. And in his opening statement, he has some stunning things. I'm just going to play a short clip of it. And some people say, well, Brennan said some things very positive towards Islam in the past. There's a rumor that he may have converted when he was in Saudi Arabia. I don't know whether that's true or not. What I do see is you saw 50 ambassadors come out and criticize Obama. You saw Brennan go and say what you're going to see in just a moment. And so what's going on? I think what people are doing is trying to protect their ability to get hired in the next administration. Because now fantasy time is over and now it's the rubber meets the road. That's what I think is going on. And sometimes facts have a way of actually getting through even these people.
This act of violence was an assault on the values of openness and tolerance that define us as a nation. In the coming months, we can expect ISIL to probe the front lines of its adversaries on the battlefield for weaknesses, to harass the forces that are holding the cities it previously controlled, and to conduct terror attacks against its enemies inside Iraq and Syria. To compensate for territorial losses, ISIL will probably rely more on guerrilla tactics, including high-profile attacks outside the territory in Syria and Iraq that it currently holds. Unfortunately, despite all our progress against ISIL on the battlefield and in the financial realm, our efforts have not reduced the group's terrorism capability and global reach. The resources needed for terrorism are very modest, and the group would have to suffer even heavier losses on territory, manpower, and money for its terrorist capacity to decline significantly. Moreover, the group's foreign branches and global networks can help preserve its capacity for terrorism regardless of events in Iraq and Syria. In fact, as the pressure mounts on ISIL, we judge that it will intensify its global terror campaign to maintain its dominance of the global terrorism agenda. Since at least 2014, ISIL has been working to build an apparatus to direct and inspire attacks against its foreign enemies, resulting in hundreds of casualties. The most prominent examples are the attacks in Paris and Brussels, which we assess were directed by ISIL's leadership. We judge that ISIL is training and attempting to deploy operatives for further attacks. ISIL has a large cadre of Western fighters who could potentially serve as operatives for attacks in the West. And the group is probably exploring a variety of means for infiltrating operatives into the West, including in refugee flows, smuggling routes, and legitimate methods of travel.
Well, okay, you can go look on C-SPAN and get the whole clip. Brennan is correct. This is coming. We're not fighting it correctly, and by not naming it for what it is, you lose the ability to challenge it. Caroline Glick has a couple great editorials this week. Is ISIS a GOP franchise? And her point in that editorial is, in Tuesday's Jerusalem Post, is ISIS really a creation of the GOP? Because if you listen to Obama, it's like it is. I mean, it's Donald Trump and the Republican Party that caused ISIS to come into being. In a Friday editorial, a great article, Obama and the Moderate Muslims, she says this. I'm going to play this, and I got one clip that will run about 5 minutes, and then we'll be out of here. Obama and the Moderate Muslims, listen to this. Maybe his actual policies were what he claims they are. Things might be different today. Maybe the White House support for anti-jihadist Muslims combined with the purge of all mention of jihad and related terms from the lexicon. And for some reason, my slides are all messed up. So let me jump ahead to a part. Okay. Excuse me 1 second. Caroline makes a good point. How does refusing to call out the Islamic extremists, the Islamic moderates, like the Green Revolutionaries and Sisi? She's talking about the Green Revolutionaries in Iran that our president refused to support. And he says, oh, we have a problem with Iran. Well, you could have supported this Green Revolution that was taking place a number of years ago. You did nothing. Al-Sisi, the head of Egypt now, has come out and said to clerics, you guys are out of control. You need to stop this. He said this in the country where Sunni Islam really has its Al-Azhar, its major seminary. And on the other hand, at the same time that Obama doesn't come out and support people in the Muslim world that are against this problem, he's supporting groups here in America and allowing them to come into the government like CARE and others. It's a problem, and naming the enemy, Caroline says, is a big problem. The Gatestone Institute, in an article today, The Impact of Islamic Fundamentalism on Free Speech, notes this problem. The chief threat to free speech today comes from a combination of radical Islamic, I don't know what happened to my slides here. I had a major crash this morning, right? I mean, I lost everything. I worked on it overnight. Chief threat to free speech today comes from a combination of radical Islamic censorship and Western political correctness. And she concludes that, we've got this problem. We should talk about it to what it is, similar to what she said at the Jerusalem Post conference in New York. Now, Phil Haney, who we've talked about here before, has come out this week with some additional information. As you know, I know Phil, and he's a great guy. His background was entomology, bugs. That's what his degree was in, and then he ended up, investigating Muslims. And so he'll use analogies about ant farms and stuff like this in his talks and everything. It's pretty good. I mean, and by the way, he's on Jan Markell's show this weekend and next weekend. So you need to get it. You should get his book, really, because it lays out how he was shut down in his investigation at Homeland Security. and brought up on charges. And so he's been all over the talk shows this week. He was on Hannity the other night. He also gave a news conference in Washington I'm going to play a little bit of. And what he did was, when he saw, now listen, this is a guy who had looked at the Teobandi, the Taliq al-Jamaat terror group that comes not out of the Middle East, but out of Pashtun, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. It's another terror network. And he had pieced it together, and that's what the terror network, the mosque that the guy that did the shooting in San Bernardino went to a mosque in that network. So when the shooting happened in Orlando, Phil went home to his computer, or I think he's on a book tour, so he went back to the RV they're using, and he gets on his computer, and he looks, and guess what? The mosque that the guy went to in Fort Pierce, Florida, is part of the same network. That network, all the information about that network, it was the Department of State under Hillary Clinton and the Department of Justice under Eric Holder that came in and deleted all that stuff off of the system so that law enforcement out there could not query the system and find out information about the networks, because it was unfair to these guys to note that they were Muslims. That's what they were told. It was political correctness run amok. And at which point does it stop being political correctness and become a deliberate way to collapse? Here's Phil just talking at the end of his news conference in D.C. the other day.
The thing in Orlando is like a radioactive spill from a nuclear power plant. It's part of a network that's spread across the entire United States. And this is one of the points I want to try to make. Every time we see an act of terrorism in the United States, the finger eventually always goes to ISIS. This network is not even Arabic. This is Indian subcontinent in origin. It's an entirely different branch, if you will, of a big tree. The notion that everything originates from ISIS is a false notion, and it will lull us into a sense of complacency that will get us hurt over and over and over again. There are more than one networks operating at the same time in the United States. Then from Dar Uloom, Chicago, I go right up to the Institute of Islamic Education. This is the case that I worked on with the 67 direct deleted records. And from there, one more step, and we're into the Tablighi Jamaat initiative. Now I have a direct, no-gap link all the way from the mosque in Fort Pierce all the way up to the case that I garnered 1,200 law enforcement actions from in 11 months, 100 a month, which is like 25 a week. Plus, I was given, as you will see in the book if you have looked at it, credit for finding 300 terrorists while I was working at the NTC on a TDY. How many terrorists were involved in this shooting in Orlando? 1. How many in San Bernardino? 2, maybe 3, depending on how you want to count it. How about Fort Hood? 1. How about Chattanooga? 1. How about Boston bombing? A couple, 2 or 3 maybe. Still waiting to see about that. How many did I get credit for? 300. That's right. So I broke this on Breitbart a couple days ago, and now things are blowing up. I don't criticize my law enforcement colleagues, but when Director Comey said that we had done all we had, my immediate question was, did you talk to CBP? When you conducted your investigations on the ground of Mateen, did you share any of the information with CBP so that they would know if he traveled and he was coming back and forth, they can collect more data for you?
Talking about the fact that the terrorist was interviewed 2 or 3 times, and did the FBI do anything with that information? They kept it among the FBI. They didn't share it with other people who might put him on a no-fly list or something like that.
On the other hand, did CBP ever know that he was being investigated by the FBI? Probably not. And the reason why is because we don't have reciprocity. We can't share information directly. It has to go through a liaison called the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF liaison. And that's the state of things where we are. But there's one more point. Does anybody recall what Mateen's father said about his son when the news started breaking?
Okay, this is the terrorist's father, okay, guy who's very involved in Afghan politics, lives here in the United States, and he came out, said some things about his son. Well, I don't know where he got all this. I just don't understand how it happened. Now listen to this.
Just to paraphrase. Well, guess what we found out this morning? Senior Mateen is the vice president of the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce. Which tells you now, and it proves my point all along, that this is a network of organizations. There's no such thing as a random act of violence any more than there is a random ant of violence, because ants live in colonies. And if you take an ant away from its fellow ants and put him in a little jar, he'll die within hours. As soon as you separate the ant from the colony, he just turns into a raisin and dies. He has to be within the environment. Same with the Islamic world. And let me finish up with the real nature of the threat. It's not jihad, it's Sharia. The reason we see jihad is a tactic. Sharia law is the strategy. And we're fighting tactics when we don't understand the strategy, and we are doomed to fail every time, because in shooting, those of you who shoot know you have to acquire the target and stay aimed in. What if the target is moving and you insist on firing at where the target was? You'll never hit anything. But what if you know where your target's going to end up in 10 minutes from now, over there in that corner? You wait. That's the difference between strategy and tactics. We will not be successful in defending our liberties and values till we comprehend the true nature of the gravitational force of Sharia law vis-a-vis the U.S. Constitution. It's not about our neighbors, it's not about prayer, it's not about freedom of religion, it's about Sharia law versus the Constitution. We need to shift the narrative, take the remote away and say we're not going to watch that channel anymore, we're going to watch this channel. This is the U.S. Constitution channel right there. It's staying on that, period. And if we...
Okay? So I would highly recommend, you can find that on YouTube and watch that whole thing. So, and we're a little bit over time. So look, this environment of political correctness that has been created, it's allowing these people to run with a tremendous amount of freedom. And I think it will eventually lead to persecution here. It's certainly happening in Europe. We know it's happening in the Middle East. And that problem is being imported. I think I saw an article this morning, maybe on Breitbart, that they've given 1 million green cards to Syrian refugees or Middle East refugees that are coming in. What do you think this is going to happen? I mean, so look, as Christians, we know that this is coming. We can prepare ourselves spiritually and mentally for these times. And Jesus gave us words, I'll give you what you need at the time. And our responsibility is to remain faithful to the Lord so that the Lord will be glorified through whatever happens to come our way. That's the important point. And so let's remember that. Let's pray and let's go to communion. Father, again, I just pray, Lord, that you will steel our minds, steel our hearts with the truth of your word and the power of your Holy Spirit, that we will be able to stand firm for you, for our faith, and for the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ in whatever circumstances you bring our way. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.